Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the World Wanderers podcast. This week we are excited to be talking about Querétaro, Mexico.
Yeah, so we went to Querétaro in December 2020 for a week to go and visit a couple of friends. And this was a city that we had transited through by bus. If you've ever gone from Mexico City to San Miguel de Allende, you will go right through Querétaro. It was a city that we didn't really think much of when our bus stopped there to let people off of. And until our good friend Becky Gillespie from Tokyo Becky and the School of Travels told us that she was nomading there or hanging out there with a couple of other nomad friends, we'd never really considered it as a location that we might want to live.
And the city of Querétaro is actually formerly known as Santiago de Querétaro, and it's the capital of Querétaro State. And it is just over 200 kilometers northwest of Mexico City and 60 kilometers southeast of San Miguel de Allende, and also right close to San Luis Potosi. So near lots of other states, a very central region of Mexico. And its population is just under 1,600,000 people. So it is a fairly substantial city and home to lots of commerce. There's lots of airline business there. We actually saw Bombardier, which is a Canadian company factory. And there's a number of other factories that have manufacturing operations there. So it really feels like a connected cosmopolitan city, but with lots of interesting and historical flavor to it, especially if you're in the old historic center, which is where we stayed. It feels really like a magical, historic Mexican city.
Yeah, and Querétaro is kind of an interesting city because when you're talking to people who have just vacationed in Mexico or just visiting Mexico, it's not often a city that you hear come up a lot. For many of you listening, you may have never heard of this city. And for us, that was the same, just a couple of years ago. It was a city that we'd never heard about before we were actually living in Mexico. But once you're actually in Mexico and you make friends with the locals and you talk to Mexicans, Querétaro always comes up as one of their favorite cities. We heard a ton from multiple different people that their favorite cities are Mérida or Querétaro. And after spending just a week there, we completely fell in love with it. And I totally know why it makes that list as one of the most livable cities in Mexico.
Yes, absolutely. It's known to be a really safe city, and it's located in just a beautiful area. So there's lots of farming around, but also lots of nature, mountains, and lots of great opportunities to get outside and see and do lots of stuff, including wine tasting, which we'll talk a little bit about on our later clips. And so today we also have the pleasure of sharing a couple interviews that we're going to mix in with this talk about Querétaro. And the first one is going to be with Ray Blakeney.
And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he's been on the podcast with us before. He came on a couple years ago to talk all about his business, Live Lingua. It's a online learning platform for learning languages, particularly learning Spanish. So if you've been curious about learning Spanish, maybe to get ready for an upcoming trip to Mexico, definitely check out Live Lingua. And it's pretty cool because Ray actually lives in Querétaro, and when we interviewed him, that was actually the first time I'd ever heard of the city. I had to look it up at that point and was like, oh, cool, we should go there someday. Well, our someday happened at the end of 2020, and we were able to meet up with Ray for a coffee. So we were able to also spend a couple of minutes picking his brain about Querétaro, since he knows so much more about the city than we do. So here is Ray. All right, so we are here in Querétaro, and we are sitting with Ray Blakeney, who is the founder of Live Lingua. We've had him on the show before a couple of years ago, and it's really cool to be here in person. And we're excited to chat a little bit more about this little city. Ray, can you tell us a little bit about how long you've been here and why Querétaro?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me back on the show. It's been a few years, I think, and it's nice to meet you guys in person. So I've been in Querétaro now for a while. I'm doing the math, like 12 years, I think. So this is probably one of the cities I've lived in the most in my life. As I lived in Turkey, I lived in the United States, but I've been here for 12 years, and it's a great place to live. So if anybody's kind of looking for a place that's safe, easy to get to, and has like all the modern conveniences of the United States, all for a quarter of the cost, I recommend Querétaro kind of as a place to hang out.
Yeah, and so for people who maybe haven't heard of it, I think the first time we talked to you, we were like, oh, where's that? What's it kind of like here in terms of, like, if you were coming to spend some time here, what's the vibe, the climate, the geography, that type of thing?
Okay. So Querétaro is up in the mountains. One of the things that most people don't realize when they come here, I didn't realize it when you get here, because it's a plateau. So when you show up, it kind of feels like everything's flat, but we're actually about as high up as Denver, Colorado. So don't be scared if you go up a flight of stairs and for some reason you're out of breath. It's actually because we're up at altitude. The good part about that is the weather's about 85 degrees all year round. It almost never rains, zero humidity. So the weather's ideal for a lot of people. It's kind of like Arizona weather, so if you're looking for tall green pine trees all over the place, you won't find it. It's more arid desert. City of about 1.8 million people, has a lot of industry, but the cool part is it also has one of the most well-preserved historic centers in all of Mexico. So you can walk around downtown. It's a beautiful downtown. It's one of the safest cities in Mexico. So you go out at midnight, you say, well, we're doing this in COVID times. So in normal times, you would see like kids playing in the plazas at 12 o'clock at night just with their soccer balls and playing around. It's that kind of place when you live here, but with all the modern conveniences you're used to in the United States. I always tell people, yeah, I order an Uber Eats, I watch Netflix at night, and we get our bulk stuff at Costco down the road. So we're really not like giving anything else up, but cost of living is much, much cheaper than the...
Yeah, and you were telling us just a second ago about some of the interesting and somewhat unique history here. And I think when you get here and just start walking around, you notice, like, it feels very European.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. So Querétaro was actually founded not as a city. It was founded for a place to evangelize northern Mexico. So it was actually the Catholic Church who founded Querétaro. The way that they evangelized most of northern Mexico wasn't kind of going in the conquistadores and killing everybody. They tried to do it through art. So what they would do is they would teach the indigenous people music and art. Of course, the music and art that they would teach them would be Christian religious music and art, and that's how they evangelized a lot of this region. That's how the city started. Afterwards, it became kind of the go-to point between a lot of the north where the silver trade was and Mexico City, and then all the way out to Veracruz where they were shipping everything back to Spain. So it started getting a lot of money and the city started growing and growing. For a while, it was the capital of Mexico. So when you get to the Mexican Revolution, this was actually the capital before they moved to Mexico City. And even the French quote-unquote emperor, which was, I think, some cousin of Napoleon or something that they sent over here to rule Mexico, this is where he made his home. And he was here only for about 15, 20 years before they actually shot him on a hill that's nearby to us right now. But his wife was the one who influenced a lot of how the city was built in the plazas. So when you go around it, it's not a typical Mexican plaza. You have manicured trees, you have a lot of cafes. If you've been to the Zocalo in Mexico City, you know that's not what a Mexican Zocalo generally looks like. It's an open space for gathering. Here you'll see people playing, there are fountains, there's people playing music. So it's a really great place just to go and hang out and walk around all the different plazas. There's dancing fountains in some of them that you can really relax and just enjoy the outdoor spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just our first night walking around, we felt like, oh, we could be in a small European city. It's so beautiful here, and like you said, the climate is amazing. I'm curious, what is kind of like the things to do here? So if somebody comes to visit, what do they need to do? What should they make sure they don't miss?
Okay, great question. You guys have a few days left, so hopefully you'll get a chance to do a few of these things. So the downtown, we've been talking a lot about that. So that's definitely a place. Just spend a day or two or three just walking around downtown. There's always cool things to see. Even to this day, we sometimes walk a little more quickly to look in some of the doors of these historic houses because you never know what you're going to see. Unlike in the U.S. and in Canada, it's not like there's this wealthy part of town, the poor part of town, right? When you're downtown, you can walk and look into one house and it's this beautiful mansion. You look next door, it's falling apart, and then you look at the other one and it's got a beautiful garden inside. So it's kind of a lot of little surprises. So spend a lot of time downtown. Another thing that a lot of people should do is you go to the Peña de Bernal. It's the third largest monolith in the world. It's about 30 minutes outside of town. You can Uber it out there. You can take a public bus out there. It's pretty easy to go to. You can climb up. It's in a magical pueblo called Bernal. So there's a magical pueblo at the bottom. A lot of people practice yoga there because there's supposed to be a lot of spiritual energy. So you can go about 2/3 of the way up. One of my favorite experiences, I used to climb it every 2 weeks when we had the school because I would take our tours up there, so I got pretty good at it. But there was this lady at the top from Germany who was practicing opera. So the whole time we were listening to this beautiful opera music. I thought it was somebody was playing a CD, but we got up to the top and she was just sitting up there and playing it and kind of echoed across the whole valley. So it's a beautiful place to go and check out. It's in Querétaro wine country. So when you're looking out over it, you saw these wine vineyards. So you can actually do a wine and cheese tour while you're out there as well. Cheese is good. I'll leave it at that. But you can go out to the vineyards. The food is actually very good. They have like some great restaurants in a lot of these venues you guys can check out. So it's in the area called Tequisquiapan and Bernal. You can kind of go and check that out. That's worth doing. The other thing that's worth doing downtown or near downtown is in an area called El Pueblito, which in Spanish means small town, but it's actually the name of the area. There's actually an old Otomi pyramid right now. You can go and see. It's entirely free. But the cool part about the Otomi pyramid is there's an hacienda built on top of it. Because the way it happened was, so Querétaro is flat, as I was mentioning. There's some hills and mountains in the distance, but it feels flat. Back in the day, it used to flood. So the rich Spanish conquistador who owned this area built his house on this hill because he didn't want his house to get flooded. So he built an hacienda on top of it. That was about 200-300 years ago. So the hacienda became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They couldn't touch it. About 60 years ago, they discovered that wasn't a hill. That was actually an old Otomi pyramid. So they actually excavated the hill, but they couldn't touch the house on the top because that was a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well. Plus the pyramids below it are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So you can kind of go there now. It's entirely free. You can go inside and you see this Otomi pyramid with all these smaller pyramids on the side, but there's this old Spanish hacienda sitting on the top of the pyramid. So that's also really kind of cool to see. It's a day trip. It's about 15-20 minute drive on an Uber to get outside town.
Wow, yeah, that sounds really cool. I think we're gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got ourselves booked to go do the wine and cheese, so we'll keep you posted on the wine. But definitely look forward to the cheese.
Great cheese.
The wine is alcoholic.
This way, they will put fruit into it before they even ask you. Okay. That give they won't say, "Do you want a sangria?" No, they'll just stuff that apple in there and then they'll give you the wine. So
nice. And so traveling Mexico, it's so nice to be able to speak Spanish. Do you want to tell people where they can find Live Lingua and more about what you do?
Sure. So you can find us online. If you just even look for Spanish tutors, we should come up in the top 3 results of Google. But otherwise, just go to livelingua.com, livelingua.com. And the first class is on us. We give you a 30-minute trial class for free. So you're with one of our tutors, with a live tutor. So you can see if our service is what you want before even giving us your credit card or any money at all. And then if you'd like to continue, you can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
And so you heard us talk about the wine and cheese that Ray recommended as being one of the things to do in Querétaro. So we were actually able to take a tour. We did it with Tours by Locals. So it was just Ryan and I and our friend Becky, and we had a whole day where we went to see Bernal and taste some cheese, try some wine. And the wine was actually pretty good.
Yes, I think, we lowered our expectations beforehand, but we were quite impressed. And the whole experience is really, really cool. And something we got to know and we talk a little bit about in our next clip that we'll share with you guys is lots of really good food in Querétaro and lots of restaurants in the center of town that have farms and places you can go out to kind of on the outskirts of town where they're actually growing food. And so we had the pleasure of going to a cheese shop where we were able to do a really amazing wine and cheese tasting and just a really cool setting out in nature where you can see the mountains. Same goes for the wineries. There's lots of different places you can go check out, which is definitely a pleasant surprise. We also got to go see a little town. Do you remember what it was called?
Tepic?
Tequisquiapan.
Tequisquiapan.
Yes, which is a historic town not too far out from Querétaro, fairly touristic, but also just really cool to walk around. And so we did all this with our great friend Becky Gillespie from the School of Travel's podcast, or Tokyo Becky, who you've heard on this podcast a couple of different times. We actually have an interview with her that we recorded in Querétaro that came out a little while ago. And so we had the pleasure of sitting down after our adventure day to talk about her experience in Querétaro. She's the reason we went to visit her, and she had been there for 2 months, so she had a lot of insight into what it was like as a nomad. So without further ado, here is Becky. All right, so we are sitting in our Airbnb really close to the Centro here in Querétaro with our good friend Becky Gillespie, our great friend Becky Gillespie. Thank you so much for coming on to chat a little bit about Querétaro. And you're also the reason we are here. You were coming here and we're like, oh, I wonder what it's like over there. We should go check it out. So I guess to start with, what kind of drew you to this area of Mexico?
Thanks, guys. And by the way, thank you so much for coming and visiting me. It's been a great week here. I have actually been, this is my 3rd time to Mexico in the 3rd year. So every year now it seems a tradition for me to come to Mexico. And the last 2 years I've been to Mexico City. And I love that city. It's in my top 5 cities. And this city now we're in, Querétaro, is only 3 hours by bus from Mexico City. So I just actually was recommended this place by a friend. Shout out to Mick. And he had been doing a bunch of research during the pandemic about places that had good weather. I think his biggest thing was weather. He doesn't like humidity. So Cancun and Puerto Vallarta, where you guys were, they were not on his radar. And I don't mind. Like, I grew up in Ohio, so I'm not used to beach life. I can deal with I actually prefer being near the mountains, and there are some mountains outside of this city. And so he just said, why don't we give this a try? Why don't we come for a few months and see how we like it? And, Mexico, we're allowed to stay for 6 months. I think Mick is going to stay for 6 months, but I was only able to stay here for 2 months. But we arrived at the airport at the same time. We actually planned it. He flew from Canada. I was flying from Ohio, and we landed so close together that we met at the luggage conveyor belt.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's always a little bit different arriving in a city where you're there for a week and you're kind of just free and easy versus showing up somewhere where you're going to be there for a couple months. You're kind of I think evaluating it a bit more critically. What was it like? What were your first impressions arriving here in Querétaro, knowing that you're going to be staying a few months?
So Mick told me the most important thing, which was find an Airbnb near the historical center, because this city is actually really big. It's really spread out, not as big as Mexico City, but it has a lot of different parts to it, a lot of different neighborhoods. And if you're not near the historical center, you can feel like you're just in a suburb on a street. You're not going to get that charm that I think we love so much about Querétaro, which is the historical center. So I'm able to walk there from my Airbnb in 10 minutes, 15 at the most. And the other thing for me is that I wanted to be near a supermarket, because my plan B when I was here was, if this city locks down while I'm here, is my Airbnb going to be a very livable space? And is there going to be food close by? And I actually lucked out. I'm a 5-minute walk from this really large supermarket that has a bunch of things that the States has. And it's really convenient for me. So I think that's been a big thing as well, and especially this year, as we all have to think about things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a big consideration for us as we made the choice to leave home and stuff like that. Is, okay, if, unexpectedly Mexico goes into lockdown, or the city or state you're in, are things going to be fine? Will we be able to get food? Will we be able to get drinking water? How is the healthcare, the medical system, hospital situation? Are we going to like the space we're in? Because often, we'll be in Airbnbs that are quite small, or that are not, the greatest living situation because they're affordable, and we're planning to just spend all of our time out of the Airbnb. And I think, traveling during this pandemic just means that you have to take a little bit of extra kind of research, precaution, that type of thing.
Yeah, I also got a place that had my own private bathroom. And I made this, for me, it was a strange decision. I had just spent 5 months in Tokyo sharing the space in a guest house with 6 other people. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting my own place in Querétaro. But I actually ended up in a place that has 5 bedrooms. But the house is so big that there's a living room, there's a kitchen. It's a much more livable space for the long term if you do need to take these precautions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so everyone listening will have heard from Ray talking a little bit about the kind of European style of Querétaro. One of the things that's really cool about this place that we actually experienced yesterday was just there's so much around Querétaro that you can do and see. And I know you went to Mexico City as well, but can you talk a little bit about kind of using Querétaro as a base for adventure and what you've been able to do here?
Yeah, so there's a really big bus station here in Querétaro. It's just, I got lost there trying to find my first bus out when I went to Guanajuato. Guanajuato is about a 2.5-hour bus trip from here. I'd never been. It's a really charming city, and I highly recommend everybody visit. I went there for, I think, 3 nights, and it was just a really great time with 4 other nomads that were here. Also I just hired an Uber with 3 other friends and went to San Miguel de Allende from here, which is an hour one way. And it was a really charming town. It's got a lot of expats as well. In a normal situation, I would have tried to meet up with more people there. And also, like you said, yesterday we went on a wine and cheese tour. And that was like, at most we drove an hour out, and then the guy kind of drove us in a loop, he said. But we went to this town called Bernal, which has this beautiful, huge rock just like jutting up out of the landscape. I felt like I was in parts of Utah in the US, like the Wild West of America. And it was just a charming, they call them like Pueblo Mágicos, like magic towns. And it was this beautiful place, and it was very charming. I think we were all surprised how charming these towns were. He took us to another one called Tequis yesterday with its own sign. Amanda, I know you like taking your photo in front of signs in Mexico.
I love that. It's like my favorite part of Mexico.
Yeah,
so basic.
I was waiting to see it because I think it's like Tequis and then a couple more syllables. Tequisquiapan?
Yeah, nailed it.
Tequisquiapan. But yeah, one of the things that's cool just from being here a little short time, it reminded me, I guess not necessarily. One of the things I love about being back in the Rockies in Canada is it's like you can kind of adventure in every direction. And it strikes me kind of similar here of like, it's a place where if you were living and you had a car, like you can go to Bernal and go hiking. You can go to, Tequis and like explore the historic center, or near there and go, there's lots of wineries, there's cheese places, there's breweries that are kind of outside of town that are creating like interesting spaces. And then a bit further afield that there's San Miguel, there's Guanajuato. You can go hiking in the Sierra Gorda. You're about 5 hours away from getting like down into Veracruz, where it's a lot more tropical. So really like amazing, interesting stuff all over the place.
I mean, just yesterday on our tour, we passed this monument, and our guide said they used to think this was the exact center of Mexico, but actually it was 4 hours north. But that gives you an idea of how central this place is to everything.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and Mexico City is kind of like similarly central, but Mexico City is just so big, so overwhelming that like sometimes you're like, like when we took a bus to Puebla, it was like, you're like in Mexico City for an hour and a half, and then you're in Puebla, basically.
Even when we took a bus to San Miguel de Allende, we actually made a stop over in Querétaro, which is our only previous experience of the city. And it took us, like an hour just to get outside of Mexico City. And then once we were on the highway, we just cruised right to San Miguel.
I did go to Mexico City while in these 2 months I've been here. I went for 5 days, and it was fine. It was like 2.5, 3 hours by the time we got there. But once we got there, it took an hour to get to the neighborhood where we were staying. So it's just, like you said, it's a huge city.
Yeah. And so we've covered a bit about why it's like a really great place to be for a while, like as a nomad for a couple months, incredible place to be. Do you think it's also a good place if you're just like visiting, like coming on like a vacation?
I think so. I think it depends how long your trip would be, but like you just said, all those places would be great to visit. Bernal, Tequis. There's unique experiences you can do here, like a temazcal, which I did during the pandemic. It's not the thing you should do during a pandemic, but it's basically just a ceremony that kind of signifies rebirth, and you go into. Basically, it's kind of like a yurt or a teepee with a bunch of people, and you sing and chant, and there's 4 elements of the earth that you kind of honor in this ceremony. And that's available, I'm sure in several places, but right outside of Tequis. I did that early on in my time here, and that was incredible.
Amazing. And then is there anything else if people are visiting here that they should check out, do while they're in the city?
Yeah, so one place that's really cool is a huge brewery. It's on the grounds of an old factory. It's about a half-hour Uber from the center of town, and it's called Hercules. And it's really nice. There's some shops over there, and just to have you could spend your whole day there. I think they open at noon, and they go until 8 or 9 right now. But it's beautiful over there. It just felt like there's so much space, and it's, if you're into beer, they've definitely got it. And that was one place.
Yeah, and we've been to a couple restaurants here as well, and it's interesting. Both of the ones we probably were near the top of our list, both had like kind of sister winery farm restaurants where you could go somewhere outside the city and like experience their farms. So it seems like there's a lot of cool places that are like using the kind of like farming area to create cool spaces to go and enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, I grew to like the river that they have here. There is a river going through part of the city just past or just outside of the historical center. And I just loved getting up in the morning and running along this path that they've made. And there's a lot of other runners out there. And it's like, I was very grateful in the pandemic to have a space like that because not every city has it.
For sure. Yeah, it's a great spot. One that I've been walking around in the morning. We actually ran into each other this morning, which was fun. And then there's a nice big park here as well, which has been closed for quite a while, hey?
It has been. And actually, there's a few places that you guys didn't get a chance to go to, but there's a really large mall, a 15-minute drive from the center, which is called Antea. And it has just, you can really, I did my mall walking there. There's a big movie theater. And if you want to feel like I felt like I was in a different city when I went there. There's a massive supermarket there as well with really specialty products that you can, if you're looking for something, they probably have it. And that it just felt like I could fill in all these gaps in what I thought I might be missing here by just going a little bit farther out of the center, and it was possible to find it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It just confirms how livable this city seems to be. And I would agree with what you said. It seems like it's a good place to visit as well. I mean, I think if you have a week or 2 weeks vacation, you could definitely entertain yourself between just Querétaro and like the surrounding region, plus all the little cities we've mentioned throughout this segment. So I'm curious if there's anything else you want to share about Querétaro before we wrap up.
I don't think I've mentioned the weather to you on this podcast, but the weather here is very consistent. The whole time I've been here, it rained 2 days. And it's just like, it's cool in the morning. You might need a light jacket if you go out, but that was perfect for me running. And then also at night, it gets cool again. But I just love that consistency of the weather. And I did discover that there are quite a few nice food places here. The first week I was just getting tacos essentially, but the Uber Eats, like there's quite a variety there. I didn't realize that there's 21 co-working spaces in this city. And I found one called Crow that I really liked. It's actually the biggest one in the city. And that's by the old train station, which is this historical building, quite beautiful. So there's just a lot to do here. And I think especially if you're a nomad coming for a little bit longer, it's a really nice space.
Yeah, it seems like a really nice nomad city, especially because you got everything to make life easy. Lots of people here speak English at restaurants and stuff, but it's not so much like if you go to Tulum or PV or even, lots of other places where there's so many tourists that if you're just like walking around, people are going to be like, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Everyone's going to be talking to you in English. Here's there's lots of local tourism and stuff. So people speak to you in Spanish, much more feel of Mexican culture.
Definitely. I really enjoyed that as well. And it's funny, it feels so easy to live here. I didn't even notice that. I just kind of felt like I've moved to a Mexican city with other Mexicans and now I'm here. I didn't think too much about the tourist aspect.
Absolutely. And so thanks so much, Becky. People should go check out our other episode that we just did, Catching Up, which may or may not be out when this episode goes out. And if people want to go find out more about you, listen to your podcast, where should they go to do that?
I think the best place is theschooloftravels.com. I also have an Instagram at The School of Travels. You can also check out my other Instagram account at Tokyo Becky, which I actually post more regularly on.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Becky.
Thank you.
So in that clip where we chatted with Becky, you heard us talk a little bit about all the amazing things that Querétaro has to offer. And one of the things that we really discovered during our time there was that it's really an awesome base, especially for anyone who is doing the work and travel life or the digital nomad life or has the opportunity to work remotely. It's only a couple hours from Mexico City, which means pretty much anything that you need is in Mexico City, but Querétaro itself is a big enough city that you have, malls, like Becky said, access to multiple supermarkets, really great access to nature and things around the area. Plus, it's also super close to some of the major tourist spots in Mexico. So you could go explore San Miguel de Allende or Guanajuato or San Luis de Potosí. The list goes on and on with things that you could do, from just doing what we did and hiring a guide to do a wine and cheese tour and seeing a couple little pueblos mágicos or going a further distance. And on top of that, there are a ton of co-working spaces, which makes it really like the perfect hub. And one of the things we haven't really talked about with either Ray or Becky that we really loved and found was the cost of living. To get an Airbnb for a week was super, super reasonable priced. And just from talking with our friends who are living there longer term, you can definitely find apartments and that type of thing close to the centro for pretty reasonable prices. So we're definitely considering Querétaro for a longer visit in the future.
Yeah, you covered so much of it right there, but I want to really kind of echo that point about affordable living. It has so many of the great things you love about being in a larger Mexican city. Also, the fact that it's really close to Mexico City makes it a place, I think, when we've thought about, hey, we could really enjoy being here, because getting into Mexico City for a weekend would be so easy. You could even do a day trip if you wanted to spend a couple hours on the bus, either way. But also accommodation, places to stay. So we're back in Puerto Vallarta right now. Puerto Vallarta. And we are staying in a great place here, very affordable because it's not quite high season. But even before we came, I was browsing around on Airbnb, looking at some of like the monthly listings in Querétaro and being like, whoa, there's some good deals out there. Not like crazy, but like pretty affordable, pretty nice apartments and things of that nature. So it's definitely on our list as a place where we want to settle in and spend 1 month plus at some point in the future to get to know more about the city, more about the area in general.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who are not working and traveling, who might just be considering a trip to Mexico, I think Querétaro is a really great option. It's super central, like we've talked about. It has amazing weather, like Becky mentioned. They kind of say it's like the city of the eternal spring. It rains a little bit less than Mexico City. It's got a little bit less altitude and pollution and that type of thing than the city, but it doesn't get like the crazy hot temperatures that you can get on either coast as well as in the north with the beach vibes and stuff like that. So in terms of a city that would be good to visit, I think it'd be amazing to spend, like we did, a week or two there, explore some of the surrounding area and that type of thing. So we really loved Querétaro. We've been talking about it since we went. It's been about like 4 months now since we've been there. We've been consistently talking about it, and I think definitely plotting a longer stint of staying there, hopefully soon.
Yeah, so we're just going to close it off by offering some recommendations for places and things that we really liked in and around the area, so that if you're going, you'll have some solid stuff to start off your planning with. And so to start with, we went, and I think this was our favorite thing that we did, to Boca Negra, Cava de Quesos, which is like cheese cave, where they manufacture lots of their cheese. It's out of town. They have this really cool space. There's a bit of a food thing going on as well, but it's a restaurant where you can get craft beers, homemade products, and do incredible cheese tasting. So definitely highly recommend that on our list of things to do.
Yeah, and then if you're going outside of the city, definitely recommend a trip to Bernal, the Pueblo Mexico, and then definitely want to sightsee and take some photos of Peña de Bernal. It is kind of this like monolith cliff or monolith sort of mountain that just pokes right out of the earth, and you can see it as you're driving to Bernal. You'll see it from a far distance. It's not really a part of the mountain ranges there. It kind of just sticks straight out of the ground, and it's pretty cool, and the little town of Bernal is super cute. So definitely would recommend visiting that if you're in the Querétaro area. It's only like 45 minutes to an hour from the city center.
And then as far as sightseeing in town, there's a number of really beautiful cathedrals and beautiful squares and plazas that are somewhat distinct, like Ray talked about and like Becky talked about as well. Something else that you definitely have to do while you're in Querétaro is go to the Mirador de los Arcos. So there's actually an old aqueduct that still exists but no longer functions in Querétaro. But at night they light it up with these beautiful lights. And if you go to the Mirador, you're up by another cathedral with a view overlooking it. And it's really, really cool to do, especially at sunset. So definitely recommend that.
Yeah, and just a few more recommendations we have. We really loved Terraza La Grupa for sunset drinks. You can see beautiful views of the city in the sunset. And then our two favorite restaurants, which were actually recommended to us by friends who had been in Querétaro, are Maruca Cocina y Sobremesa. and Pia Cocina Libre. And we'll write these down in the show notes for those of you who are like, what on earth are you saying? But those two restaurants were by far, the best restaurants that we ate at, super reasonable prices, farm to table, amazing staff, all of that good stuff. So we definitely recommend checking those out if you are in the Querétaro area.
Yes, and if you've been to Querétaro or you want to know more about going there, definitely don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. We are planning to get back there at some point in the near future, depending on how long our Mexican adventure goes on for. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode.
Yeah, definitely let us know, like Ryan said, if you're heading to Querétaro or Mexico in general. We would love to hear from you, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the show.
Until next time. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.